What's going down, D-Gens, besides my bankroll? So, guys, we get another loss last week. That's why we only did one unit. It was the Broncos, -2.5 is what we had. Damn, I can't even get this right. So, it was Broncos +3. It was +2.5. About to hook to the +3. We lost it. I will say, it took, again, another, one in every 3 years kind of happening to get that loss. And that was the Raiders returning a fumble for a touchdown. The Raiders had not scored a defensive touchdown in 3 years. So, of course, as soon as I bet against them, that's when they're going to fucking do it. So, that sucks. Another bad beat. I do want to say two things. So, one, I lied a little bit last week. Sort of. Because I was saying if I won that one, I was going to kind of use that money, or some of it at least, to go on to the Chiefs. I bet the Chiefs anyways. I bet the Chiefs before we even got to the Broncos game. It just seemed like such a good spot. I did only a half unit on it, but it won. So that was good. And I apologize, I know that was not completely related in the video. But besides that, the algorithm and the picks that I have adjusted and switched to were really in sync as far as what the scores were looking like, what the teams were looking like, and all that kind of stuff. So let's go through that first. I just want to show you where the algorithm is at currently, because this is, again, the time of year where we start transitioning to this. I'm not even going to really bring up the Madden stuff anymore. This year, the Madden stuff for the first 2 weeks was really good. The third week was basically 500. Last week, I didn't even do all of the games, but I could tell you it was probably, again, a little under 500. It was probably 6 and 10. So, like I was saying, even before the season started, the first couple weeks are really where you want to use that, and then you're going to kind of just fade it. With the new algorithm, and this is the one we have DVOA and blitz rate, turnover rates, and all this other kind of stuff. I'll show you the full spreadsheet here in just a minute, but I'm just going to go through the teams. So these are obviously the teams on the left-hand side, the grades, the expected points from last week. This is unaltered, so this is before I updated the information for last week's games and what the actual points scored by each team were. So these over here in green are within one standard deviation. So I mark one standard deviation as 8 points, and usually it's more 7, really, right? So 7 points is the touchdown. So out of 32 teams, 17, actually, let me count them again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, oh crap, sorry, 1 second. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. 17, like I said, were within one standard deviation, so that's over half of the league. But on top of that, 3 of them were 2 standard deviations or about, right, which is roughly, I usually say 14 points. It would be 2 standard deviations. So 3 of the teams were roughly about that. One of them being the Bills was 16 points away. However, these were due to weather. So the Bills Ravens game was very weather impacted. So we expected the Bills to score 39, they only scored 23. We expected the Ravens to score 32, they only scored 20. So again, about 2 deviations down. Same thing with the Jaguars. So it was the Jaguars Eagles that we had kind of watched, but this was also very weather impacted. A lot of fumbles by the Jaguars, especially by Trevor Lawrence. He just could not grip the ball right. I think he threw 2 picks. Whatever it was, he just kept turning the damn ball over. The whole team did. So again, they were 9 points under where we expected them to be. So just a little over one standard deviation, but again, very heavily weather impacted. The Eagles actually were not far off from what we expected them to be. They were still within one standard deviation, even with the weather issues. And I think that's mainly because the Eagles are a primarily, run-heavy team. They like to run that option, and they just ran it the way they would regardless of weather. So that kind of played to their hand. So not a big deviation there. So that, if we account for that, so that's 17 that were within one standard deviation, 2 that were within 2 standard deviations, but weather, and then the Bills are kind of, we'll leave them alone, so we'll leave them out of that. But then lastly, we have these teams here that were ranked so low that they are under 10 points. So the Panthers, for example, are only rated at 4. Obviously, it's very difficult for a team to score 4 points. So In this case, this is just a kind of a learning lesson for myself as well as anybody who's following along with this algorithm. So if any team is scored at less than 10, I'm going to automatically assume a minimum of 10. So just kind of a rule for the algorithm is minimum of 10. So if you round these up, the 4 to the 10 and the 7 to the 10, then both of these games are also within one standard deviation. There's one other team that met that rule but still didn't actually meet the criteria. Or and I apologize. So this one, 4 to the 10, 16 was the final score. So that's within one standard deviation. Rounding the Texans up to 10, this is still 2 standard deviations, so that does not count. And the last one is the 49ers rounding up to 10. They scored 24, so again, 2 standard deviations. So again, this is before this week's numbers have been input. So let's just kind of keep that in mind. Like I said, 1 is going to be weather that we need to keep in mind. And then 2 is if they're scored at less than 10, you're going to, obviously we'll round them up to 10. So with all of that being said, and with these kind of rules in place here, we're up to, let's call it about 20 teams, 20 out of 32 teams that were relatively accurate or kind of where we should be. This is the very beginning of the algorithm. Obviously, this is the first week we're using it, so it's going to get better as we continue going on. But for right now, pretty happy with it. 20 out of 32 teams gives us a pretty good function. And then if you'll notice, the algorithm is pretty solid towards the middle of the middle of the pack teams. So the ones where we have an issue are the ones who score very, very high or score very, very low. And it's actually a pretty decent way to do that. That's just expected points. So these teams here in the middle, pretty good. The teams here kind of towards the end, also pretty decent. So this middle area is what we'll call it. It's pretty solid. There's a couple of outliers, but for the most part, you're going to see more green than anything. And if we account these with the weather, it's even more. So we have a pretty wide area here. If you think of this as kind of like a bell curve, it's the two very ends that are very hard to critique, just like in anything else. When it comes to bell curves, the very end is hard to classify, right? So just for an example, if anybody's not following, you don't do a lot of bell curves, I don't blame you. I wish I didn't. If you're measuring like IQs, right? Average is pretty easy to measure and handle. It's the people who are very, very smart where we have kind of a hard time rating their IQ because it's like, well, how far along are they? Or the people who are very, very dumb. It's like, well, how bad are they? So that's why the middle is easier to critique. So as long as we stay in this middle section, which again is pretty wide, we should have some success here. Like I said, the ones that are harder, again, just these very, very tippy tops. So like the Bills and the Chiefs. The Chiefs actually lived up to expectation, but that's going to be a weekly differential, and then the very, very bottom. So anyways, that's enough of that. Let's get on to the actual grading algorithm. That was really more just to show that at least we are kind of where we expect to be and need to be for this time of year. So this is the full algorithm. What goes into here: DVOA, run rates, rush DVOA, defensive DVOAs, EPA, first down pass rate, all that kind of stuff. QBR and strength of schedule are pretty big in this one too. Strength of schedule is a big one, especially this time of year, because we've had some teams that have played super, super easy schedules, and then other teams that have had very, very difficult schedules. The Texans have actually played the easiest schedule according to DVOA right now, and according to most metrics actually. So that being said, I'm actually going to pick on them a little bit. At the beginning of the year, and even before the year started, I was kind of high on the Texans. I wanted to take them against the Colts. I wanted to take them to cover a couple times already, and they actually kind of lived up to that. They didn't cover last week against the Chargers, but they had a pretty decent score. I don't think anybody expected them to get 24 points. A lot of that was just the Chargers kind of taking their foot off the gas once they had a big lead. So all of that is to go and show that they are playing the Jaguars this week. The Texans are actually rated 0, so this is the updated scoring method, or the updated numbers in the algorithm. So we have Panthers at a -5, and the Texans at a 0, Colts at a 6. So these teams, like I said, the ones that are in orange here, we're going to round them up to 10 and say that their expected points are 10. We can actually hide this actual points because this is from last week, so we don't need to look at that anymore. This is the record of the opponents that they have beat. So the Jaguars, again, expected to score 28. Texans, we're going to say that they're expected to score 10. Their current spread is 7. I'm all over the Jaguars on this one. Jaguars have a top rated defense as well as offense. If you look at their DVOAs, very positive on both sides of the ball. The offensive DVOA maybe not as great, but it's still it's a positive number, and it's much better than what we look at with the Texans, where they have a negative 19 negatives in both spots. The Texans, I believe, are ranked like dead last in most DVOA metrics, and then, like I said, they have had the easiest schedule. So while I like the Texans in certain spots, and I do believe that they have a pretty decent, if not conservative, approach to the game, I like the Jaguars in this one. The Chargers gave up a lot of points in that second half. They just really, like I said, took their foot off the gas. They had a pretty big lead. The Jaguars here coming off a loss. This is a divisional game for them. They're not going to take it lightly. Doug Peterson has these guys playing. Their offense or defense has been great all year long. They're relatively healthy. No big issues to speak of there. The Texans have been terrible at stopping the run. Their rush DVOA, so in the defensive DVOA on this section here, if you're looking at your screen, the rush defensive DVOA here, I'm kind of moving the cursor to it. You want these numbers to be negative. That means that you're keeping the offense to below their average. So in this case, the Texans are positive 13, so that's a bad thing. Jaguars are negative, so that's a good thing. The Texans, though, are pretty damn bad at stopping the run. These are color-coded, so obviously the red is not good. Red's pretty much never good. But they're one of the worst run-stopping defenses in the NFL, and the Jaguars run at 44% of the time. And the Jaguars have had just amazing success that I did not expect to see. Even last week against the Eagles, the offensive line that the Jaguars had was actually pushing around that Eagles offensive line, or the defensive line, I'm sorry, and the Eagles are pretty damn good on both lines. Now, the Eagles are doing it right back to them on the other side of the ball, but the Jaguars really showed that they have a decent offensive line as far as run blocking is concerned. I expect them to have a lot of success, and if you're playing like fantasy, daily fantasy, whatever, this is one of those spots where I would not be too scared to put in Travis Etienne. I'm not saying he's like a home run hitter right off the bat, but I do think this is one of those games where, one, he may only get 7, 8, 9 carries. I could definitely see him averaging 5 to 7 yards a carry. Plus, if he gets 2 or 3 catches, that's another let's say 5 or 6 yards per catch. And if they do get a bigger lead, I could completely see them rolling with him in just the fourth quarter, letting him kind of do what he does, getting more carries and hopefully another touchdown or so. So I could see him having a bigger game and kind of being under the radar right now. Now, that being said, on the passing side of the ball, we have the Jaguars passing 56% of the time, Texans passing 64% of the time. A lot of that is because they've been down in so many games. They have to pass. Now, with that being said, their passes have not been efficient. They are a negative pass DVOA. Jaguars are, of course, positive pass DVOA. Their defense as well, the Jaguars have a negative pass defensive DVOA, meaning that they are keeping the other side of the ball in check for the most part. And again, keep in mind, the Eagles are the only 4-0 team right now, and the Jaguars really gave them a run for their money. The Jaguars had a really hot start to that. They were up 14-0 at one point. One of them was a pick six, but still the offense was moving the ball pretty well in that first half, and it wasn't until the weather really got to them that they kind of stopped moving the ball as effectively as they should have been. The Texans, again, positive pass defensive DVOA, meaning that they give you a little bit more than what you probably usually get. One of the bigger ones that I want to look at here is the EPA per dropback. It is negative for Davis Mills, so he's dropping back a lot. He's dropping back pretty frequently, and one thing that we had discussed before is his pass rate on first down. So that's a good thing. We want these teams passing on first down, but he's just not being efficient with these at all. There's not too many teams that are negative EPA when it comes to dropbacks, and he's one of them. He's one of the worst. Now, I don't think that's necessarily his fault. I think some of it is they don't have a lot of good receivers. They don't have a lot of great schemes to get people open. But on the flip side of that, the Jaguars are passing even more on first down, which is good. And they are actually being efficient with it. EPA-wise, we have the Jaguars at about 0.05 points per play. The Texans at a negative expected points added per play. So that's never good. Success rate, also, again, it's going to lean towards Jaguars here. Still not like over 50, which is where you really see some amazing success, but it's pretty decent, especially when you're going up against a team that's going to give you most likely more than what you're accustomed to getting. Sack rates, nothing really big here. I actually think that the Texans have a decent defense, and that's probably kept them in a lot of games. This is a defensive adjusted sack rate. The higher the number, the better, which is why if you look at the 10s on the right-hand side, you're going to see these from teams that have, notoriously good defenses like the Cowboys, the Bills, stuff like that. So Texans actually have a decent defense. I do believe that the Jaguars are going to be able to move the ball on them, though, and kind of stay ahead of the sticks and not give the Texans a whole lot of opportunities to get those sacks, just by moving the ball quickly, efficiently, and kind of getting the ball out before anybody even has time to get there, especially if Zay Jones is back this week. Just as a reminder, he did not play last week with the Eagles, and I do think that hurt their offense because he is, volume-wise at least, their number one receiver, and they had to rely on Jamal Agnew, which, Zay Jones isn't the best guy in the world, but better than Jamal Agnew. Last thing here, like I said, the Texans have had the number one easiest schedule. Jaguars have had the 13th easiest schedule. It does get easier as the year goes on, but for right now, they've had some pretty good, competition that they've been able to beat. Also, QBR-wise, Trevor Lawrence playing pretty well at a 5.88, excuse me, QBR, and Davis Mills all the way down at a .28. Now, I will say that the QBR for the Texans, or for Davis Mills, is, I want to say, one of, if not the lowest. I think he might be like the second lowest QBR. 1, 2, 3. No, at least the third lowest. Yeah, so he's like tied for basically third worst in the NFL right now. So just a lot of stuff that's not really looking the Texans' way as far as efficiency on offense. But aside from that, they're not playing up against a team that's going to give them a lot of freebies. So like with the Chargers last week, if we look at their defensive DVOA, they're all the way down at 1 compared to the Jaguars at 14. The Chargers, kind of across the board here when it comes to defenses or defensive DVOA, defensive metrics, they're good, not great. They have, if you're looking through this line, Chargers are kind of yellow or orange, kind of medium in most areas of play. So again, not great, not bad, but if anything, they maybe lean or skew a little bit more to below average. One thing that was really kind of sticking out to me when I was going through this, the Chargers are 2-2. The two teams that they beat have a combined record of 1-6. So, take that for what it is. But they beat the Texans by 10. They probably should have beat them by more. They should have maybe kept their defense going for a little bit longer. But with all that being said, the Texans lost by 10 points to a team who really hasn't beat anybody. Compare that to the Jaguars, who are also 2-2, but the teams they've played against are combined 3-4. So again, still not great. It's still not a team where like the Chiefs, who have beaten some pretty good teams, but the Jaguars have at least played some fair competition. Everything to me in this one is pointing Jaguars, just all across the field. I really expect the Texans to have a very hard time moving the ball, getting anything going. The Jaguars' defensive metrics are just off the chain. And if you have actually watched the Jaguars play, watching another team try to run against these guys is ridiculous. Last week, you saw the Eagles have a lot of success. The Eagles are a very outlier team when it comes to running the ball. We have a team who can basically run the option every single play, and you're going to have a very hard time stopping it because they not only have, if they're in a pistol formation, they don't only have two running backs that are legitimate running backs. Then they also have a quarterback who can just keep the ball. And even when they pass the ball, they can run with the ball. And so it's very hard to stop that run game. And you combine that with the fact that they have what I like to consider the number one offensive line in the NFL. Very difficult to stop that. And the Jaguars actually played okay. They still kept them below what we would expect their points to be. So the Jaguars have a pretty stand-up defense. Aside from that, though, if you see the other games the Jaguars have played, they really have not let anybody's ground game get going. And the Texans, while yes, they like to pass on first down, they are still kind of a run team. They like to let Dameon Pierce do his thing. Last week they had at least one big run from Dameon Pierce that kept them sort of in the game or giving them a shot. That's not going to happen with the Jaguars this week. It's not to say that he couldn't possibly, rip off a long one, but it's much less likely. And without that ground game going, I think there's going to be a lot of 3-and-outs, a lot of really short drives, just a lot of issues moving the ball, a lot of 3rd and longs that you're going to put Davis Mills in, and you're going to ask him to go out there and convert, and he's just not efficient even on 1st downs. So it gets worse every down that you get behind the sticks. So again, I see this being very one-sided. I could see this being another 24-0 win for the Jaguars, just like they beat the Colts. The Jaguars outright winning this division is looking more and more like a possibility, if not just an outright conclusion at this point. So again, for all of those reasons, I'm taking the Jaguars -7. That's my best bet. That's really the only pick I'm putting on here. If you're asking for any other lanes, or you're curious, or maybe you want to fade it, I will tell you I do feel much better this week about the picks and about the numbers and algorithms that I did last week. Last week I was very hesitant. I really was having to rack my brain and try to find angles and put these algorithms together and things like that and just kind of build it from scratch because the EDSR is not there anymore. Whereas this week I feel more confident in it. We have at least a week of kind of backdating and trials and things like that. That all being said, Other teams I would be looking into if you want to know, if you're curious, like I said, whether you want to follow it, fade it, whatever. There's really not too many, but I do like the Browns +3 against the Chargers. The Browns, at least per this algorithm, should be scoring about 31 points per game, whereas the Chargers should be scoring about 25. Obviously, the Chargers went well above that last week, kind of because they had to. They would have probably been happy sitting around 25. But either way, the Chargers just don't have a great run defense at all. I do expect Nick Chubb to go off on this game. Maybe even Kareem Hunt gets in on it as well. But the Chargers just have not been able to stop this. The Browns, on the other hand, their defense is pretty banged up as well. They have, I want to say 2 or 3 of their defensive linemen missing from this game. Myles Garrett is still kind of questionable. So this could be a high-scoring game. If you go back and watch the game that they played last year, I forget the exact score, but I want to say it was 45-48. It went over 90 points. Both offenses do what the other defense is bad against. And the Browns being able to run the ball, to me, means a couple different things. So one, they should control the time of possession, and two, they should be able to, when it comes down to the fourth quarter, kind of do what they want and put themselves in the best positions to win. Aside from that, the Browns actually kind of have at least a couple of options on how they want to attack you. The Chargers, they should have a few ways that they want to attack you, but they really haven't shown any efficiency with it yet, and they have only been able to beat teams that are the absolute DFL, just dead fucking last. Like I said earlier, they are the teams that they have beat are combined 1-6. Not really inspiring stuff. The Browns, I do think, are just a better team. Is going to be one of the better teams that the Chargers have played this year. Obviously, they played the Chiefs. But that all being said, I do think Herbert is probably still just a little bit dealing with those rib issues. Maybe he is getting shot up before the game, so maybe it's not as big of a deal, but I do think it could come into play, especially if he takes a good hit. Hopefully they keep him clean. But either way, the Browns +3. Everything on my end says the Browns are the play here. And aside from that, just the eyeball test says that the Chargers are going to have a very hard time stopping the run. I do think that the Browns could also struggle as far as stopping the Chargers from scoring. And again, it could be a very high-scoring game. But at the end of the game, I think the Browns just have more options. They have more firepower as far as what's in their backfield. And they have the better offensive line. And they should be able to control the tempo, the time of clock, and put themselves in the best situation to win. So that would be my second play if you're looking for a lean on that one. And the last one, of course, is just the Ravens. I think the Ravens are gonna go out there. They should do a lot better than they did last week. The reason I'm not putting them on the card this week, and the reason that I'm not making them my pick, is really just injury. Rashad Bateman, I don't know if he's gonna play. Lamar should still be fine without them. And the Bengals, I really want to know more about their blitz rate. It is one thing I'm looking up, and you may want to look that up too if you're interested at all in putting money on this. It's Sunday night game. You're probably going to be watching anyways. But if the Bengals are going to send the blitz at Lamar Jackson has been amazing against the blitz this year, and he's won pretty much every time someone tries to blitz him. So I do believe the Bengals need to lay off. They need to just kind of stay in their cover 3 and not send the house at this guy. If they do that, they have a good shot at kind of limiting this offense. If they start trying to send people at Lamar, he's going to pick them apart. That's what it comes down to. If you want to wait to live bet the game, you can do that. If you want to see where the Bengals are as far as just like watching old games, the games that they played so far, you can see how they've kind of attacked different offenses, but I don't think we've seen them put a lot of pressure on people yet. So that would be the third lean if I really, if you really wanted to look at that. But the top two are going to be exactly that, my top two plays. So for now, going with the Jaguars -7, and then my second lean would be the Browns +3. So hopefully that's good information. Again, fade it if you want to because of the cold streak. Follow it if you think it's about to turn around. Hopefully you got at least some numbers out of this. And if you want the spreadsheet, just hit me up in a comment. Leave me like your Twitter handle, email, whatever. I'll send you a copy of the spreadsheet. You don't have to do this all yourself. But thanks again, guys. Have a good day. Good luck, and win some money.